So this morning, we get to approach a passage in the book of Luke, chapter 16, that perhaps you have read before and wondered, what in the world is Jesus talking about? It is the parable of the shrewd manager. The parable of the shrewd manager. It is a passage in Scripture that people have kind of gotten a little bit weird over at times because they think, is Jesus commending underhandedness? Is Jesus commending deceitfulness when he shares this parable with us? And I'm going to tell you that no, he's not commending that. So kind of brush that out of your mind. But he is commending something as he shares the parable with us, as he teaches us from this parable. He is commending something, and I want us to look at that together this morning. I want us to see this together and to kind of come to an understanding that in Jesus commending this dishonest manager, as Jesus commends a man who found a way to not necessarily cheat a former employer, but a man who found a way to make good for himself at the expense of others. I want you to see that there is something Jesus wants us to connect with how we prioritize the things that are most important to us. So the parable of the dishonest manager is not ultimately going to be this morning for you about a guy who is shrewd with his wealth, but it has everything to do with how we who know Jesus, who love Jesus, who trust Jesus, how we approach the use of what God has given to us. And so the title this morning, and I will say this hopefully will be a clickbait title, because I get to see these metrics as the sermons get posted on YouTube, and people click on certain titles more than others because some of them are a little bit more provocative. Filthy rich is where we're going this morning. Filthy riches. The passage that we look at here has a word in it. Perhaps you are familiar if you grew up reading the King James Bible. There's the word mammon. Mammon. We don't typically use that word. Perhaps you've heard the phrase filthy lucre before. Anybody heard that phrase? Filthy lucre. Sounds like pirate words. Well, that's where we get this from. This passage, Jesus talks about unrighteous wealth or filthy lucre. So filthy riches is where we're going this morning, Luke chapter 16. So verses 1 through 15 is where we find ourselves. I will read this for us as we look at the parable, and we see some comments that come on the end of this that help us understand that this parable is not ultimately about Jesus saying, you should be shrewd with money. It's not ultimately what it's saying. So Luke 16, starting in verse 1, we hear these words. He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, filthy lucre, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts, for what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. So here's our big idea. Write this down, take a picture of it, do whatever you want, but here's our big idea this morning. The heart priority of every Christian is to be faithful with God in all things, however large or small, so that with all things we might reflect a surpassing love for God and what he loves. So the heart priority of every Christian is to be faithful with God in all things, however large or small, so that with all things we might reflect a surpassing love for God and what he loves. So we're gonna get there. We're gonna arrive there this morning as we look at the parable of the dishonest manager. Again, it may not be the first thing you think of when you hear this parable, but that's really where we're going. That's really where we're going, because there's a flow of thought that Luke helps us see here as Jesus is telling this parable, as he wants us to understand the things that are communicated by this parable in the teaching remarks he shares afterwards. This has everything to do with Jesus saying, you need to be faithful before God in all things, in everything, and not just in everything in the sense we think, okay, well, all things, but in all things, regardless of what the priority is the world wants to attach to them. In all things, whether they are large or small, you have to pursue this as your primary, as your chief goal. It sounds funny that we're going to get there from a dishonest manager who seems like he's being unfaithful, but we are going to get there, I promise. So we're going to look at this parable a little bit more closely before we get to that spot, so we can arrive there logically. So again, Luke 16, 1 through 8, here is the parable stated for you again. And I want you, as you hear these words, to not simply think about dishonest manager rewriting things. Just think, what is it? What is it, if you know the words that come after this, as Jesus talks about being faithful in small things, faithful in large things, why in the world would he connect that to this parable? Ask yourself that question. See if you can get there the same way that we do together. Jesus said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master has taken the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. And he said to another, and how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. Interesting. So here's what I think we need to see as we look at this parable more closely. Jesus' purpose of this parable isn't to celebrate underhandedness, but to show that even unbelievers praise shrewdness with the things most important to them. So when I say here the things most important to them, maybe that'll help trigger in your mind the idea that we're getting closer to when it comes to faithfulness before God in all things. Because what Jesus is helping us understand here is that if you look across the landscape of the pagan world, you think about this particular parable, you think that even a pagan can appreciate that when the thing that matters most to him is used in a way that accomplishes something that seems like, well, I guess you're getting it. I guess you're getting the idea of how this works, that he'll applaud him, even if it costs him something. That there is something about how this manager, in all of his deceitfulness, goes about his dealings, goes about his business, that the guy who's firing him can look at him and say, I think you get it. And there's a little bit more background to this to help you understand. We're going to see that in Leviticus chapter 25. Seems like way out of left field, but hopefully it'll make sense to you as we go on, understanding why it is Leviticus 25 has everything to do with this. So Leviticus is relevant to Luke. Leviticus is more than relevant to Luke. Let's see why. So as God gives the law through Moses, he says, if your brother becomes poor and cannot maintain himself with you, you shall support him as though he were a stranger and a sojourner, and he shall live with you. Take no interest from him or profit, but fear your God, that your brother may live beside you. You shall not lend him your money at interest, nor give him your food for profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. So here's what's happening. Here's what's happening. In Jewish law, it was illegal to lend at interest. Okay. Now, the Jews could lend at interest to pagans, but they couldn't lend at interest to other Jews. And so within the culture, there were loopholes. Jesus criticizes the Pharisees all the time for finding loopholes in the law. But one of the loopholes that they could do, and this is really helpful insight, I got this from Alistair Begg, listening to him preach about this. I was like, okay, I've never really understood this way before, and this is super helpful. I hope it's helpful to you. What would happen is the Jews would write into a bill of sale. So think about a situation here where you have a guy who maybe fallen on hard times. It's agrarian society, and so they were responsible for raising their own crops, and they would raise their crops, and they would sell their crops, they'd eat their crops, all these different things. And if somebody would fall on hard times, he would go and he'd say, I need some wheat. I need some wheat. And he'd go to somebody who had a proliferation of wheat, and he'd go to him and say, I really could use 80 measures of wheat. Could really use 80 measures of wheat, need to feed my family, need to feed my livestock. This is needful for me. And so he'd go, and the loophole that would be exploited here is this shrewder guy. He's the shrewd guy on the top of everything, guys. Shrewder than everyone would look at the need of his countrymen and say, I know I can't charge you interest. So I know I can't say to you right from the start that 80 measures of wheat, you're going to owe me 5% interest. Instead, what would happen is a bill of sale would be drawn up where he would write 100 measures. Now, it seems like kind of a dumb thing. Like, okay, well, how is it not charging interest? But that's what would be generated. Generated would be a bill of sale that said, so-and-so actually borrowed 100 measures of wheat. Because it wasn't interest, and so it was a technicality. And so as we look at this parable in the minds of the people, because he's talking to people who probably took out loans. He's not necessarily talking to people who were always giving loans to those. He's talking to people who would have taken loans out and they're thinking, okay, yeah, I may have done this before. I may have done this. And, good old John down the street, he lent me, not an interest, he lent me 50 measures of oil, but he charged me for 100. I know how this works. I understand how this works. This happened to me. And so as this parable is being told, Jesus is helping them understand that there's a shrewdness that's occurring at the top here. And as this manager is brought for charges, he had been wasteful. He had been taking this guy's stuff and just frivolously spending it. He was a prodigal spender. He just threw it away on whatever he felt like. It's brought up finally to his manager, this really shrewd guy at the top. And so shrewdness is appreciated by this man at the top because he's been dealing shrewdly with the people he's lent to. He's kind of a loan shark. He's just not actually charging interest proper. And so this manager knows his business, the way that the guy who's been lending has been carrying himself toward others because he's written up these bills of sale. And so as he finds out he's going to be fired, he goes to the people and he said, here's what you should do. What you should do is remember that 50 measures of wheat. Remember the 50 measures of wheat you borrowed? Here's what you need to do. Rewrite it and just put 50 measures. Now, why could you do that? Why would you not just be brought up on charges then yourself? Because, I guess this guy should be brought into a court. Because you couldn't bring him up on charges in a court because you couldn't charge interest. And so this manager knew full well that if he went and he started providing these bills of sale and writing them up for the amount that was actually borrowed, no judge would ever condemn the guy who was really shrewd at the top because he would then have to say, well, he did borrow 50, but I charged him for 100. That was against the law. And so this very shrewd manager decided to appreciate the shrewdness of his lending overseer in such a way he appropriated it for himself so that he looked at it and the guy's like, well, good job. You did what I would have done. You did what I would have done. And so Jesus tells us this parable so that we can start getting a picture of how it is that the world around us operates. The world around us operates in a certain way that even those who use money like this can appreciate the way that other people might use money like this because they know that they do it themselves. And what is significant here is that he is talking about money. And the significance of money is this. Money is the thing that is most important to everyone in this world. It really is. with very few exceptions, money represents for people freedom. Money represents for people control. Money represents for people a sense of value and worth in the sight of others. Money represents everything to us. And the reason Jesus talks about money so often is because it stands at the heart of the worship that we are given to by nature. Because money doesn't necessarily have the value on its own. What has the value is everything we attach to it, everything the culture around us attaches to, and we chase after it, we pursue it. And so this parable stands to show how does the world function in relationship to the thing that it values the most? How does the world look at the thing that's at the center of its worship? Imagine showing up at a place of worship every single week, and right in front of everybody is you have this pile of cash just sitting here, a big pile of cash. And people show up and they bow down to it, sing songs about it, praise it, whatever they want to do. This is how people approach money. And Jesus helps us see in this parable that those who worship money appreciate the way that those who also worship money pursue that worship. Now, here's where it kind of connects for us into this idea of faithfulness with what God has given to us. Where it connects is that we are called as the people of God to worship God. God is at the center of everything that we do. And so as Jesus finishes out this parable by saying that the sons of this generation are more shrewd in their dealings than those who are sons of light, he's saying, consider the lengths to which an unbeliever will go to worship money. Are you, Christian, willing to go to those types of lengths to worship God? If an unbeliever will risk everything that he has in the pursuit of the thing that is most important to him, will you risk everything you have in the pursuit of the God who saved you? And I hope you can see now that this parable, the dishonest manager, really does have everything to do with how you prioritize what you love. And that faithfulness to God is where this connection point comes in, because this dishonest manager is faithful to money. He's faithful to money above everything else. And what he wants to do is make sure that how he uses money is going to benefit him. He's going after individual debtors because he knows that even if he loses his job, these people will really appreciate him and he's going to have an in somewhere else. So be asking yourself this question: what lengths will I go to worship God? What lengths will I go to if a demand is made upon me by the God who has rescued me? What lengths will I go to show that he is most valuable to me? So from the lesser to the greater, here's where we start connecting Jesus' teaching now beyond the parable. Jesus said, I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, not if, but when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? So as Jesus helps us see the shrewdness of the world with its fading treasures, he points us to see that how we handle faithfulness with small things like fading treasures reflects how we handle large things like eternal treasures. What's interesting here is that Jesus talks about unrighteous wealth like this. He says, this is a small thing. It's a worthless thing. He talks about it as something that will fail. And so when Jesus says here something to the effect of how you handle this, it seems interesting to me that as he puts this in front of us, this is money. As you approach money, it seems like a really big thing. It seems like it's everything because the world around us wants it to be everything to us. But Jesus says this is a small thing. This is kind of where he starts turning our understandings of what is most important upside down for us. Because as this passage finishes out, he talks about the Pharisees who are lovers of money, and he talks about not serving two masters. He wants you to see here that the thing that the world wants you to prioritize the most is a small, small, small thing. Jesus told another parable that we're going to look at here on this topic of faithfulness, because I want this idea of faithfulness really kind of drilled into our minds together, because Jesus wants us to see. He wants us to see over and over as he talks about how we use our lives. He wants us to see that the most important thing is not the object of your faithful stewardship. It's the faithfulness itself. It's not how much. It's not the object itself. It's the faithfulness itself that Jesus is seeking for us to pursue and to prioritize. Who am I going to be faithful to with what I have? So this parable in Matthew 25, he's talking about his return. He's talking about how people are going to relate to what has been given to them and how Jesus will assess that. It will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. We'll get back to that concept in a little bit. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me the 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So the whole point of this parable that Jesus is sharing, this is in Matthew, the whole point of this parable in Matthew, just like the point of the parable in Luke, is for us to see that God prioritizes faithfulness to him above all else. Because as he goes through the list of individuals in this parable, he talks about people who have a lot, he talks about people who have not a lot, people who have not a lot less. And notice that this man who comes back to collect what has been entrusted to these servants of his, he's not saying to them, why didn't you make more? Or why couldn't you have more? The thing that he's most interested in is, how did you handle what I gave to you? How? Not how much. How did you handle it? Because even the servant who had 1 talent, the servant who had $50 to his name, he said, you could have just given this money to a bank and they could have given you $2. Now, why is this important? It's not because this master wants $2 more. It's because it reflects the fact that those servants still saw themselves to be servants of somebody else. They didn't see it as their own. Because if this was just money that belonged to guy A, guy B, guy C, and it's their own, it just belongs to them, then what is the interest of this master in what they have? But if the truth of the matter is that these men still remain servants, even if they have been entrusted with these things, what's being reflected by the master as he returns is the fact that the servant's priority was to honor him as the one who had entrusted it to them. It's not to make X number of dollars more. It's to say, this that I have is not my own. This that I have is to be returned one day to the one who gave it to me. And the master commends those who regarded what had been entrusted to them. He commends them for having that priority. So as you connect this with how you use resources, how you steward, the Christian term we use, steward resources. The reason we use the term steward is because we recognize that it doesn't belong to us. As we look at money, we look at it and say, this might be the treasure of the world around me, but I know that it belongs to God. The difference between how we as Christian people relate to money and those who are not Christian people is that we don't see this as something to be worshiped, and we don't see it as something that is fundamentally ours. The security of the Christian when it comes to our finances, when it comes to how we make our way through each day, the security that we have is that we know the one who rules the world, and that we don't need to bow down to the things that this one who rules the world gives to us. This is really where you think about things like the prosperity gospel becomes abominable. Because all the prosperity gospel really does is it seeks to shrewdly replace in the Christian's valuing, the prioritizing, seeks to shrewdly replace the thing that ought to be worshiped, which is God, and see God as a means to the end of finding the same value that the world around us sees with money. See, Jesus' goal for us here. Jesus' goal for us is to look at these things and to say, it doesn't matter how much I have, it just matters what I do with it. It doesn't matter how much I have, it just matters what I do with it. And if we understand that this is the case with the thing that is most valuable to the world around us, then it extends to everything else. If God has given to me 20 years on this earth, how do I use 20 years? If God has given to me 50 years on this earth, how do I use 50 years? If God has given to me 80 years on this earth, how do I use 80 years? Because God is the one who has given it to me the whole while. God is interested in your faithfulness to him regardless of what you have. You think about the widow who has so little and she gives all that she has in offering and service to God. The point there is not to say, well, Christians are responsible for giving 100% of their money to the church. That's not what it's saying. What Jesus is saying when he talks about this woman who gives everything that she has, he's saying to us, look at how she regards what she has. It doesn't own her. In her worship, she sees as the most important and valuable thing that God is at the center of everything. And you have a remarkable freedom when you recognize that at the center of life, at the center of the world, is not the thing that the world around you wants to pursue. Your faithfulness ought not to be to money. Your faithfulness ought to be to God. Again, this is where the prosperity gospel gets it all messed up, because they talk about sow your seed gift of X number of dollars and this type of thing and this type of thing and law of attraction, all this kind of business. Jesus says, just that's garbage. That's garbage, because what is at the center is how are you faithful with whatever you have? And with whatever you have, that's not a sign of whether or not you are in God's good graces or not. What it is instead is God is giving something to you. He's saying, for the time you have it, use it to honor me. Use it faithfully to honor me. And however much you get from it, however much you have, just show that you cared about the fact that it is mine. Like these servants who are commended here as good and faithful. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, Paul is talking to a church that loved prosperity theology, and he says, I have applied all these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, brothers, that you may learn by us not to go beyond what is written, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one against another. They had been seeking to establish parties within the church, those who were more popular and those who were less. Those who were more successful and those who were less. They were establishing these parties, and they'd say, well, I belong to this party and that party and that party, whatever. Paul is saying, look, I'm applying this principle to all of us. And he goes on to talk here about the fact that what you have is yours by reception. It says, who sees anything different in you? What do you have that you did not receive? If then you received it, why do you boast as if you did not receive it? To people who are very, very keen on this idea that somehow what we have is a measure of our worth and value, Paul is saying, what you have is yours because it was given to you. And this is an incredibly freeing thing. It's hard because it has to jar us loose from a way of thinking that is bred into us. But it frees us because we recognize whatever I have, however small or however large, is mine because God has designed it for me. If you find yourself discouraged because you don't have as much as you would like, there are a couple of questions to ask about it. First of all, have you been faithful to God with it? There are ways to be unfaithful with money that get you into trouble. Okay? There are ways to do that. So if somebody is sitting there saying, man, I wish I had more, well, maybe you shouldn't be throwing money away at Ho-Chunk. Okay? Maybe you shouldn't be purchasing the platinum package of DirecTV, whatever. I mean, there are ways that you can throw money away. There are ways to be foolish and faithless with money. But if you ask yourself the question, am I being faithful with this? Then you sit there and you say, I'm freed to know that if I seek first God's kingdom, if I seek first God's righteousness, then it doesn't matter what I have because I know he'll take care of me. And if he can take care of me, that frees me up from worshiping the thing that everybody around me wants to worship. If I'm faithful to God, he will be faithful to me. It is hard to think this way. It is hard to live this way, but Jesus calls us to it repeatedly. This is not a one-off in Jesus' repertoire. He is constantly telling us, don't set your hope on things that will fail. Be faithful with the things that will fail, because there are things that won't fail that are reflected in how you use the things that will fail. Paul says just before that, he says it's required of stewards that they be found faithful. If you want to paste that on your wallet, wouldn't be a bad idea. It's required of you, Christian, that you be found faithful. God will bring into account how you use the life he's given to you. That includes your money. You'll be called to account for it. At this point, it would be proper to say something I think that I've heard Stan say to me before. It's been said by other people, so I'm not going to trademark it for him, but you can't outgive God. Here's the reason why you can't outgive God. And this is not a call here for a capital campaign. This is not a call here for, let's just see how we can get the budget inflated. Okay, God has given us a lot. He's taking care of us. But the whole point of saying something like you can't outgive God is this. Everything belongs to him. He owns it. And if he's promised to take care of you, and you seek to be faithful to him in all that you do, he'll take care of you. He'll take care of you. Because the purpose of money is not there for our security. The purpose of our money, like I think about my checking account. I think when I log into my app on my phone to look at my checking balance, I get scared sometimes. I'm like, oh, well, it should be this amount, shouldn't it? I need to maintain this balance on my account, don't I? And there's wisdom in that. All right, listen to Dave Ramsey or whatever you want to do. But the reality is, if you've been faithful to God, if you've honored him with what he's given to you, he'll take care of you. He will not fail you because it belongs to him. He didn't just give it to you and say, well, this is yours now, good luck. He's always giving to you. He's always giving to you your breath. He's always giving to you a heartbeat. And he's always given to you the things you need to live. Luke 12, we covered this a few months back. Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. You ever worried? You ever worried? I'm worried. I worry. That's not good. Jesus said, don't do it. Don't be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. With how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you by being anxious, which of you by worrying can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? Do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So you see here this dynamic that Jesus is very clear with us about. He said, you don't need to worry about this stuff because it's your Father's good pleasure to give you something even more valuable than the stuff. It's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So when Jesus talks about being faithful in little and faithful in much, he's saying, guess what the little is? The little is everything that the world wants you to worship. Even if that little is like $1 billion. That's a little thing compared to the kingdom of God. And so he is saying, don't be afraid of using these things over here that are going to fail. Don't be afraid of using failing things for something that won't fail. Don't be afraid of being faithful in a thing that is so little in comparison to something that is so great, because God is giving you that freely. So if he gives you something that is so great freely, if he freely gives you his kingdom, how will he not freely give you little dumb things like money? How will he not do that? I share this again, and I want it on record now because this was awesome. It was wonderful. But I share this again because I shared it the other week. And this is just something that as we went about our business as a family, we lost our fridge a couple weeks back. Didn't like it at all. I don't like spending money. I'm really cheap. And so my fridge breaks, and my first thought is, well, how are we going to pay for that? Because inside I'm like, I need to maintain a balance in my checking account. I need to maintain a balance. I don't want to spend money. And part of why I don't want to spend money is because I way too easily find security in it. And so fridge breaks, like, oh no, this is awful. And I always, because I'm cheap, I go through Lowe's, look at their clearance aisles, like, what can I get there for cheap? And I go through Lowe's clearance aisle and I see the refrigerators there. I'm like, okay, refrigerators are still discounted to like a certain amount of money. Like, oh, don't want to spend that. And the day my fridge breaks, I log onto my Lowe's app on my mobile telephone and I see, oh, there's a refrigerator here that's really cool. Oh, it's $2,000 off. Well, that's cool. That's a lot of money that I would like to not spend. And so ask some wisdom from my wife. And she's like, well, buy it right now. Do it now. Don't wait till tomorrow. Buy it now. So I bought it then. Called my mom. My mom was like, okay, well, it doesn't look like that's the price here. And then a couple days later, the price is back to normal, $2,000 more. Just this bizarre happenstance. The day that my fridge breaks, God took away and he gave. But it's such a small thing. It seems like a big thing to us. It seems like a really big thing. As I'm thinking about appliance purchases in my home, I think the fridge is probably up there with furnace. It's a small thing. Because God knows you need it. And if you need it, he'll take care of it. The only thing that's required of you is you're faithful to him with what he has given to you. You don't need to be found with every dollar in the world as a sign that somehow you are really at the top of God's list. Instead, you found with what you have and say, how have I used this to honor him? And as you do that, as you're faithful with a small thing like money, he'll give you greater things. That's not more money, greater things, his kingdom. So we're going to land the plane here. One master, one priority. Verses 13 through 15. No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. And he said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God." What is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. It's a pretty strong word. A Christian's heart priority. So here's where we want to go. We want to go to our heart priority, not just do some things out there. Heart priority. A Christian's heart priority is to serve God and employ all things, including the things this world treasured most, in the service of God's priorities. Fading money can serve an unfading kingdom. 1 Timothy chapter 6, Paul says, "As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God who richly provides us with everything to enjoy." So replace your object of worship. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. You think about the shrewd manager that Jesus commends here. He's saying, okay, well, guess what? The people of this world are going to look at that and say, hey, good job storing up for yourself a good reputation with others so that you're going to get received into their homes now. Jesus says you can use something fading like money so that when you get to the other side of glory, God looks at you and says, good job. Well done. Well done. Because you've been faithful. The pagan world, the unbelieving world, wants you to be faithful with money for money's sake. How can you get more of it? How can you accumulate? How can you use it to benefit you the most? And Jesus says that's a really backwards way of looking at it. Again, it's prosperity gospel, just garbage, because that's how they look at it. It's just money, 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 money at the center. Jesus says, be faithful to me, because you can't serve two masters. You can't serve refrigerators and God. You can't. If you're going to obsess over something as small as money, you're going to lose sight of that which is truly worshipful. The more value you attach to the things that fade, the less you're going to have in your heart stored up for that which doesn't. And this is the biggest peril that I think we face as we get older. Because I think, what was I like in my early 20s? I mean, I remember being in college, and it was the coolest thing in the entire world because we had this thing called Point Cash. Point Cash was you get money loaded onto this card, and you can go eat restaurants with it instead of just going into like the university center. You can go eat Burger King. And that's what I did. I went to Burger King. And I'm 20 years old, 19 years old, whatever it was. Went to Burger King, living in my apartment, go to Burger King. I'm going to get a burger. I got a hamburger. And this is before hamburgers were like $8. There's a hamburger for 79 cents. Got a hamburger for under $1. Bought a hamburger, and I went to County Market, which is now Festival Foods. And I went to Triggs for a while. Went to County Market. I got mini Cadbury eggs. Not the ones with the fondant in them, but the candy shell. And that would be like my food for the day. I thought this was the coolest thing in the world because I'm not in my parents' house. They're not going to tell me I need to eat cooking light food. I can go eat a burger and I can have Cadbury eggs. So I did that, and that would be my food. And I would go to the Basement Brew House University Center, and I would get bagels, day-old bagels from a bagel shop. And it was great because it was like $2 and get a few bagels. When I'm 20 years old, that seems like it's enough. But as we get older, and we get used to the fact that things can bring us a sense of momentary pleasure and satisfaction, these things start asserting themselves. And maybe you're like me, where you look back at a time in your life like, wouldn't it be nice if I enjoyed things the way I did when I was 20? Wouldn't it be nice if I just saw these things and like I did when I was 20 years old as a young Christian, looking at it like, well, God gave this to me. How awesome is this? God provided a great deal on day-old bagels. You know why? It's because I look back at that time in my life, I really prioritized seeking God's kingdom. And so everything that I saw as a means to pursuing God. Everything I saw, I was like, okay, day-old bagels, I can eat, great. But now when it's food, it's like, okay, how do I get the best deal possible? Because I just want to accumulate stuff. Instead of seeing, God has called me to seek his kingdom. And I can't serve two kingdoms. I can't serve two masters. And the more that you let your heart get caught up with all these other things, and it's not a call for you to just throw your stuff away, but it's to say, like, God has given you something. And how you use that something is reflective of what you love and what your trust is in and what your hope is in and what your priorities are. And money in God's sight is a very small thing. And he's given it to you. He's given you stuff. Say, how will you use this to show what you love? It's a litmus test. What do you love? Who's your master? Who are you serving? Is it refrigerators? Is it God? Do you see a refrigerator as an end in itself? Do you see a refrigerator as a means to, okay, well, keep my food cold? Because that's all it's for. Money is just there. Money's there for you to serve God with. It's not there as an end in itself. But we're tempted constantly to treat it like it is. When we listen to Jesus say these things to us, it really rubs us the wrong way. Until we realize that he wants us to have something better. He doesn't just tell us, get rid of your stuff and live poor. He's saying, use what you have for something better. Because there's going to come a day when you will stand before God, you will give an account, and you're going to present everything in your life. Do you not want to hear the one who owns everything tell you, you did a good job? You did a good job. I know you messed up 1,000 times. You did a good job, though. That's worth a lot more than getting something that's going to break one day. Because you know that fridge of mine that broke? It used to be new. It used to be new. And I'm sure that when the builder of my house bought it, he's like, it was a good fridge. Put it here. And it cost this much money. Well, guess what happened with it? I took it to the dump and threw it out. So it's worth nothing now. That's not the case with God's kingdom. It never fades. It never spoils. And so Jesus' words to us here are, don't be like the Pharisees who love money. Don't be like Pharisees who love to be seen by other people as being important. Don't be like them. Because what's exalted in the sight of people is an abomination to God. That's a strong word. It's used a handful of times in the Bible. It's used for deviant sexual activity. It's used for loving money. Don't pursue the thing that's an abomination in the sight of God. Jesus doesn't use that word happenstancely here. He uses it intentionally. Because it stands as the biggest obstacle for our worship. It stands right there and says, seek me, worship me, treasure me, value me. And Jesus says, you can't do it. You have to choose to set it to the side and say, this, just like everything else, is there so I can pursue the kingdom of God. So that at the end of all things, I might hear from my dad, you did a good job. You did a good job. Seeing this unfaithful manager who becomes a shrewd user helps us see that faithfulness in the thing that we value most will result in something that is praiseworthy. It's just not money. So worship team, will you please come up? We're going to sing together. I'm going to sing a song right away. My worth is not in what I own. It's intentionally chosen because I don't want you to think your worth is in what you own. Your worth is the one who created you. And that worth is expressed in your faithfulness to him. So let's pray together. Father, we recognize that everything we have has been given to us. And that everything that has been given to us, we will return to you. And we are rich in this country. We are just rich. Even the most poor among us are just pretty rich. And I'm embarrassed, Lord, at times to think about how entitled I am and how much value and worth I ascribe to myself based on what I have or don't have. And that's a common experience to all of us, Lord. So we pray you would free us up from that. Free us up so that we might look at something as small as money and see it's there as a tool. See it's there as something we can look at and say, this is such a small thing compared to a kingdom you give generously and freely to your people. If you've not spared your own Son, how will you not also with him graciously give us everything we need? So please find us faithful, Lord. And as we sing together, move our hearts to consider a worth that goes far above and beyond what we have in our checking account today. In Jesus' name, amen.